The crack of a gunshot pierced the dawn as Kieran McAllister's steady hand brought down a buck at 200 yards. The four small faces huddled behind him in the tall grass didn't flinch at the sound. They'd grown used to it over these past 8 months, since their mother had been laid to rest beneath the cottonwood tree behind their homestead. Wyoming Territory, 1878, was no place for the soft-hearted, and Kieran had learned that lesson the hard way. "Did you get him, Pa?" 7-year-old James asked, his small fingers clutching his father's worn leather vest. Kieran lowered his Winchester rifle and nodded. "Sure did, son. That's meat for a week if we're careful." 5-year-old twins Emma and Eliza clutched each other's hands, their identical braids hanging limply over their shoulders. At 9, William, the oldest, was already pulling out his knife, ready to help his father dress the deer as he'd been taught. "Girls, take James back to the cabin and get the fire stoked," Kieran instructed, his voice gentle but firm. "Will and I will bring the meat back shortly." As the 3 younger children trudged back toward the simple log cabin that had become both haven and prison since Catherine's passing, Kieran sighed, running a calloused hand through his dark hair, now streaked with premature gray at 32. "Pa," William said hesitantly, "Miss Henderson at school says we need new clothes for winter. The girls' dresses are getting too small." Kieran nodded, jaw tightening. Another expense, another reminder of his inadequacies. "We'll manage, we'll always do." The boy nodded solemnly, far too serious for his age as they approached the fallen deer. Together they worked in practiced silence, the weight of responsibilities unspoken between them. By the time they dragged the dressed deer back to the cabin, the sun had fully risen over the distant mountains. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and Kieran could see Emma attempting to hang laundry on the line, standing on tiptoe to reach. Inside, James was attempting to sweep the floor while Eliza stirred a pot of oatmeal that was clearly burning. The cabin smelled of scorched grain and unwashed children. "I tried to make breakfast, Pa," Eliza said, her lower lip trembling as Kieran lifted the pot from the heat. "You did fine, sweetheart," he lied, ruffling her hair. "Just needs a little water to thin it out." Later, after the children had eaten and been sent to their chores, Kieran sat at the rough-hewn table, ledger open before him. The numbers refused to cooperate, no matter how he juggled them. Between the mortgage payment to the bank in Whispering Pines, the cost of supplies, and the new clothes the children needed, they were sinking deeper into debt with each passing month. The farm, 40 acres of decent grazing land with a small vegetable plot, had been Catherine's dream more than his. Kieran had been a ranch hand, comfortable with cattle drives and sleeping under the stars, but Catherine had wanted roots, a place for their children to grow. Now he was tied to this plot of earth by 4 small souls and a promise made to a dying woman. A knock at the door startled him from his grim calculations. Visitors were rare this far from town. When he opened the door, Sheriff Dawson stood on the porch, hat in hand. "Afternoon, McAllister." "Sheriff," Kieran nodded, tension creeping into his shoulders. "Something wrong?" The older man shifted uncomfortably. "Got word from the schoolteacher, Miss Henderson. Says your little ones have been coming in. Well, not as tended to as they might be." Heat rushed to Kieran's face. "My children are fed and clothed. No one's saying otherwise," Dawson placated. "But there's talk in town. Some folks think those children might be better off with families that have mothers." The implication hung in the air between them. "You telling me they want to take my children?" Kieran's voice dropped dangerously low. "Not saying that at all," the sheriff backpedaled. "Just that you might want to consider getting some help, a housekeeper maybe, or—" He cleared his throat, "finding a new wife." Kieran's grip tightened on the doorframe. "My children aren't going anywhere, and neither am I." After the sheriff departed, Kieran leaned against the closed door, the man's words echoing. He'd been so focused on keeping them fed and sheltered, he hadn't noticed how much else was slipping through the cracks. That evening, after serving a stew of venison and wild onions, he gathered the children by the fireplace. "Tomorrow's Saturday," he announced. "We're all going to town." William looked up from his whittling. "For supplies?" "That too, but first, we're all getting baths at the barber shop." "And haircuts for you boys." Emma perked up. Can we go to the mercantile? Mrs. Billings said she got new ribbons in. Kieran swallowed hard. We'll see about those ribbons, and maybe look at fabric for new dresses for you girls. The excited chatter that followed made his chest ache. Such simple pleasures shouldn't be rare occasions. The next morning they loaded into the wagon before dawn. The journey to Whispering Pines took nearly 2 hours, the children dozing against each other in the back of the wagon. As they approached the growing town, now boasting nearly 500 souls since the railroad had come through, Kieran straightened his shoulders and adjusted his hat. The barber shop was their first stop. Mr. Peterson raised his eyebrows at the sight of the McAllister brood but warmly welcomed them in. While William and James were getting trimmed, Kieran arranged for hot baths to be drawn in the back room. The girls first, he instructed, pressing coins into Mr. Peterson's hand. And if you could send someone to fetch Mrs. Peterson to help them, I'd be obliged. After baths and haircuts, the children looked transformed, almost like the well-cared-for family they'd been when Catherine was alive. Kieran felt a mixture of pride and shame as they walked down the main street toward the mercantile. Inside Billings' general store, the bell above the door announced their arrival. Mrs. Billings looked up from where she was measuring fabric, her expression softening at the sight of the children. "Well, don't you all look fine today," she said, coming around the counter. "What can I help you with, Mr. McAllister?" "The girls need new dresses," Kieran said awkwardly. "And the boys need trousers. I reckon we need some other things, too." Mrs. Billings nodded kindly. "Let me show you what we've got. Tabitha," she called toward the back room. "Come help with the McAllister girls, would you?" A young woman emerged from the storeroom, wiping her hands on her apron. Kieran felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been kicked by a horse. Tabitha Morgan stood before him, her chestnut hair neatly pinned, warm brown eyes taking in the scene. She'd been Catherine's friend years ago, before moving away to care for an ailing aunt. He hadn't seen her since before William was born. "Kieran McAllister," she said, a gentle smile curving her lips. "It's been a long time." He fumbled with his hat. "Miss Morgan, didn't know you were back in Whispering Pines. Came back last month after my aunt passed," she explained, then knelt down to the girl's level. "And who are these lovely young ladies?" As the children introduced themselves, Kieran watched Tabitha's easy manner with them. She spoke directly to each child, listening intently to their shy responses. Even William, usually so reserved with strangers, answered her questions about school. While Mrs. Billings helped the boys find trousers, Tabitha took the girls to look at fabric for dresses. 3 dresses each would be proper, she said, glancing at Kieran. "Everyday, Sunday best, and one for cold weather," he stiffened, calculating the cost. "We'll start with everyday dresses." "The Sunday ones can wait." Something in Tabitha's expression shifted, but she nodded. "Of course, let's find something sturdy that can be let out as they grow." By the time they'd finished their shopping, the wagon was loaded with more supplies than Kieran had intended to purchase. Besides the fabric and notions for dresses, there were new shirts for the boys, a set of primers for James, who was struggling with his letters, and various household necessities. As Mrs. Billings tallied the bill, Kieran's stomach knotted. He'd have to dip into the money he'd been saving to repair the barn roof. "I've added a discount," Mrs. Billings said quietly, "for bulk purchasing." Kieran recognized the kindness for what it was, but pride made him hesitate. "That's not necessary, madam. It's my store, Mr. McAllister, and I'll set my prices as I see fit," she replied firmly, pushing the receipt toward him. As he paid, Tabitha approached with a small package. "A gift for the children," she said, handing it to him. "Some peppermint sticks, if that's all right." The gesture was so unexpected that Kieran could only nod his thanks. Outside, as they loaded the last of their purchases, Tabitha followed them to the wagon. "The girls' dresses," she said hesitantly. "I could help with the sewing if you'd like. I'm quite skilled with a needle." Kieran frowned. "We couldn't impose." "It's not an imposition," she insisted. "I could come out to your place, or the girls could visit me here in town on Saturdays." Before he could refuse again, Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Please, Pa, Miss Morgan is so nice." Looking into his daughter's hopeful face, Kieran felt his resolve crumble. "We'd be grateful for the help, Miss Morgan. What would be your fee?" Tabitha smiled. No fee, just the pleasure of the girls' company, and perhaps dinner when I visit. It's been too long since I've had a home-cooked meal not prepared by myself. On the wagon ride home, the children were unusually animated, chattering about Miss Morgan and the treats she'd given them. Kieran remained quiet, unsettled by the day's events. They needed help that much was clear, but accepting it felt like admitting failure. Still, as he glanced back at his children's scrubbed faces and neatly trimmed hair, he couldn't deny they looked better than they had in months. Perhaps some help wasn't such a terrible thing. The following Wednesday, Tabitha arrived at the McAllister homestead as promised. She brought with her not only her sewing basket, but also a basket of fresh bread and preserves. "I hope I'm not overstepping," she said as Kieran helped her down from her rented buggy. "But I remembered how fond you were of blackberry jam." The thoughtfulness of the gesture left him momentarily speechless. "The children will appreciate it," he finally managed. Tabitha raised an eyebrow. "Just the children." The hint of teasing in her voice caught him off guard, reminding him of the easy friendship they'd once shared before Catherine had caught his eye. Tabitha had always been the more serious of the two women, less inclined to flirtation, more practical in her outlook. "I've been known to enjoy blackberry jam myself," he conceded with the ghost of a smile. Inside, the cabin had been hastily tidied that morning. Kieran had instructed the children to clean thoroughly, aware that having a visitor, especially a female one, would invite judgment. The girls greeted Tabitha enthusiastically, eager to begin work on their new dresses. William and James hung back, watching curiously as she set up her sewing things at the table. "I thought we'd start with patterns today," Tabitha explained, spreading out paper. "The girls need to be properly measured." While she worked with Emma and Eliza, Kieran took the boys outside to continue repairs on the fence that had been damaged in the last storm. Through the window, he could hear occasional laughter from inside, a sound that had been all too rare in their home. At midday, Tabitha called them in for dinner. To Kieran's surprise, she had prepared a meal from the supplies in their kitchen, a hearty stew that smelled better than anything that had come out of that pot in months. "You didn't need to cook," he said, embarrassed. "I wanted to," she replied simply. "The girls helped, they're eager to learn." After the meal, Tabitha continued working with the fabric while Kieran returned to his chores. When he came back in later that afternoon, he found her seated by the fire, reading to James from one of the new primers while Emma and Eliza practiced stitches on scraps of fabric. The scene was so domestic, so reminiscent of when Catherine had been alive, that Kieran felt a painful constriction in his chest. He must have made some sound because Tabitha looked up, her expression softening. "The girls are quick learners," she said. "They've already mastered the running stitch." Kieran nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. When it was time for Tabitha to leave, the children begged her to return soon. "I'll be back on Saturday," she promised. "We'll make real progress on those dresses then." At the buggy, Kieran helped her with her baskets. "Thank you," he said stiffly. "The children enjoyed your visit." Tabitha studied his face. "And you, Kieran, did you find my presence completely intolerable?" The directness of the question startled a laugh from him. "No, Miss Morgan." "Not completely." She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "Good. Because those children need more than new clothes and reading lessons. They need someone who cares." Before he could respond, she continued, "And so do you, Kieran McAllister. Whether you're ready to admit it or not." With that, she climbed into her buggy and drove away, leaving Kieran standing in the yard, her words echoing in his mind. Over the next few weeks, Tabitha's visits became a regular fixture in their lives. Each Saturday, she would arrive with her sewing basket and often some small treat for the children. The girls' dresses were coming along beautifully, and Eliza and Emma proudly showed off their growing sewing skills. More than that, though, the entire household began to transform. Tabitha gently suggested routines that made their days run more smoothly, a chore chart for the children, a menu plan for the week, more efficient ways to manage their limited resources. One Saturday in late October, as golden leaves drifted down from the cottonwoods, Kieran found himself watching Tabitha through the window as she hung laundry with the girls. There was something about the way she moved, purposeful, but unhurried that drew his eye. William appeared beside him, following his gaze. "Miss Morgan is nice," the boy observed. "She is," Kieran agreed cautiously. "Ma would have liked that she's helping us," William continued, his voice matter of fact. "She always said Miss Morgan was the most sensible person she knew." Kieran looked down at his son, surprised. "Your mother talked about Miss Morgan," William nodded. "Sometimes. She said if anything ever happened to her, Miss Morgan would know what to do," he shrugged. "Guess she was right." The boy wandered away, leaving Kieran stunned. Catherine had never mentioned such conversations to him. But then, there had been so much left unsaid in those final weeks as fever claimed her after James's difficult birth. That evening, after the children were in bed, Kieran invited Tabitha to stay for coffee. They sat at the table, the lamp casting a warm glow over her features. "William said something interesting today," he began, watching her face. "Said Catherine told him you'd know what to do if anything happened to her." Tabitha's hands tightened around her cup. "Catherine wrote to me a few times after I moved away," she admitted. "Her last letter, she wasn't well. She worried about the children, about you." "Why didn't you say anything?" "What would I have said?" Tabitha asked quietly. "That your wife, in her final days, feared for her family's future. That she asked me, her old friend who lived hundreds of miles away, to somehow watch over you all." She shook her head. "It wasn't my place." "But you came back," Kieran said. "Not because of that," Tabitha clarified. "I came back because my aunt passed and I had nowhere else to go. Finding you all in need, that was coincidence, or providence, perhaps." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Catherine's foresight hanging between them. "You've done more for my children in a month than I managed in half a year," Kieran finally said, the admission difficult but necessary. Tabitha reached across the table, hesitantly placing her hand over his. "You've kept them safe, fed, and together. Don't diminish that achievement." Her touch was warm, comforting in a way he'd almost forgotten. Without thinking, he turned his hand to clasp hers. "When I saw you that day in the mercantile," he said slowly, "it was like seeing a ghost from better days. I wasn't sure whether to be grateful or resentful." Tabitha's lips quirked. "And now I'm just grateful," Kieran admitted. "But I can't keep accepting your charity. It isn't right." She withdrew her hand. "Is that what you think this is? Charity? What else would you call it? You refuse payment, you bring gifts, I care about those children," Tabitha interrupted. "And I care about you, Kieran, I always have." The implication in her words hung in the air between them. Kieran felt a rush of conflicting emotions, guilt at the thought of another woman when Catherine was barely cold in her grave, fear of opening himself to potential loss again, and beneath it all, a flicker of something he'd thought long extinguished. "I should go," Tabitha said, rising from her chair. "It's getting late." Kieran stood as well. "I'll hitch up the buggy. There's no need to trouble yourself. It's a clear night and the moon is bright." "I won't have you traveling alone in the dark," he insisted. "It's not safe." As they rode through the moonlit landscape, silence stretched between them. Kieran was acutely aware of Tabitha beside him, the subtle scent of lavender from her clothes, the way she held herself straight but not rigid. At the small house on the edge of town that she'd inherited from her aunt, he helped her down from the wagon. "Thank you for the ride," she said formally. "Tabitha," he began, then faltered, unsure what he wanted to say. She looked up at him, her face half in shadow. "Yes." "Will you still come next Saturday?" The tension in her shoulders eased. "Of course. We have dresses to finish." As he drove home under the vast Wyoming sky, Kieran found himself considering possibilities that had seemed unthinkable just months before. November brought the first snow and new challenges. The children needed to be driven to school in the wagon on bad days, making Kieran's work schedule even more difficult to maintain. The roof of the barn finally gave way during a heavy snowfall, requiring immediate repairs they could ill afford. Through it all, Tabitha's Saturday visits continued, becoming the bright spot in their increasingly difficult weeks. She finished the girls' everyday dresses and began work on their winter ones, lined with flannel for extra warmth. She taught Eliza and Emma to cook simple meals, showed James tricks for remembering his letters, and even spent time with William, who was showing an interest in the medicinal herbs she grew in pots on her windowsill. For Kieran, her presence was both balm and torment. He found himself looking forward to their conversations after the children went to bed, the easy way she listened and offered advice without judgment. Yet each time she left, the cabin seemed emptier, colder somehow. The week before Thanksgiving, disaster struck. James fell ill with a high fever and cough that left him gasping for breath. Kieran sent William to town on their fastest horse to fetch the doctor, but a sudden blizzard closed the roads. When Tabitha arrived on Saturday, fighting her way through snow drifts, she found the household in crisis. James lay burning with fever, the girls were frightened, and Kieran had been awake for nearly 2 days straight. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, immediately taking charge, removing her snow-covered coat and rolling up her sleeves. "Fever started Wednesday," Kieran said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Got worse yesterday. I sent Will for the doctor, but he came back alone, said the doctor's gone to the Thompson place for a difficult birth." Tabitha nodded, already examining James. "It's his lungs, I've seen this before." She turned to Kieran. "I need hot water, clean cloths, and any whiskey you have." For the next several hours, she worked tirelessly, applying mustard plasters to James's chest, bathing him with cool water when his fever spiked, and forcing small sips of honey-laced tea between his cracked lips. Kieran hovered nearby, following her instructions and watching her confident movements with growing hope. This was a side of Tabitha he hadn't seen before, calm in crisis, knowledgeable about healing. "My aunt was a midwife," she explained when he questioned a remedy she was mixing. "She taught me. Not everything, but enough to be useful." By evening, James's breathing had eased somewhat, though his fever remained. Tabitha insisted Kieran get some rest while she watched over the boy. "You're no good to any of your children if you collapse," she said firmly. "I'll wake you if there's any change." Too exhausted to argue, Kieran stretched out on his bed, intending only to close his eyes for a moment. He woke hours later to find the cabin quiet and gray with early dawn light. Panic seized him as he rushed to James's bedroom. There he found Tabitha asleep in the rocking chair beside the bed, her hand resting on James's chest. The boy's face was peaceful, his breathing regular and unlabored. When Kieran touched his forehead, he found it cool and slightly damp. The fever had broken. Relief made his knees weak. He sank down beside the bed, overwhelmed by gratitude. The movement woke Tabitha, who blinked sleepily before focusing on James. "His fever broke around midnight," she whispered. "I changed his nightshirt and gave him more tea. He's been sleeping peacefully since." "You saved him," Kieran said, his voice thick with emotion. Tabitha shook her head. "He's strong like his father. He fought hard." Later, as dawn brightened the windows, they sat at the kitchen table, cradling cups of coffee. The other children still slept, exhausted from the frightening ordeal. "I can't go back to town in this weather," Tabitha said, glancing out at the snow-covered landscape. "Not until the roads are cleared." "You'll stay here," Kieran stated rather than asked. "We'll make up a bed for you in the girls' room." She nodded her agreement, then hesitated. "Kieran, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." The serious tone of her voice made him tense. "What is it?" "Mrs. Billings has offered me a permanent position at the Mercantile, as her partner eventually. She has no children to leave the business to, and she's not getting any younger." "That's wonderful," Kieran said, ignoring the sinking feeling in his stomach. A partnership in the town's only general store was a fine opportunity for a single woman. "It would mean more regular hours," Tabitha continued. "I'd be in the store 6 days a week," understanding dawned, "so you wouldn't be able to come out here on Saturdays anymore." "Not regularly, no." She looked down at her coffee. "I haven't given her my answer yet." "I wanted to speak with you first." Kieran frowned. "Why would my opinion matter? It's your decision." Tabitha met his eyes directly. "Because these past months I've come to care deeply for your children and for you, whatever arrangement we've fallen into. It means something to me. I need to know if it means something to you too." The directness of her question left no room for evasion. Kieran stood, pacing to the window where dawn light sparkled on fresh snow. "Of course it means something," he said roughly. "The children adore you. The house feels right when you're here." "And you, Kieran?" He turned to face her. "I'm not free to offer what you deserve, Tabitha. I have 4 children who depend on me, a farm that's barely staying afloat, and more debts than I can manage." "I didn't ask what you could offer," she said quietly. "I asked how you felt." The distinction struck him silent. How did he feel? The answer was both simple and terrifyingly complex. When you're not here, he finally said, I find myself counting the days until Saturday. When you are here, I find myself watching the clock, dreading when you'll leave. He swallowed hard. I feel more alive when you're around, more, myself. Tabitha's eyes shone with unshed tears. Then ask me to stay, Kieran. It's not that simple, it can be, she interrupted. You don't have to do this alone, any of it. The echo of his own thoughts from so many sleepless nights startled him. How many times had he stared at the ceiling, overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising 4 children without help? What are you suggesting? He asked cautiously. Tabitha stood, moving to stand before him. I'm suggesting that there might be a way forward that benefits us all. The children need a mother's care, you need a partner, and I. She took a deep breath. I need a family to love. The word love hung in the air between them. Catherine's only been gone 8 months, Kieran said, though the protest felt hollow even to his own ears. I'm not asking to replace Catherine, Tabitha said gently. No one could, but she was my friend, and I know she would want her children to be raised with love and care. She would want you to find happiness again. Kieran closed his eyes, remembering William's words. Perhaps Catherine had foreseen this possibility, had even hoped for it. I can't ask you to take on another woman's children, he said, one last objection. You're not asking, I'm offering. Tabitha reached for his hand. And they're not just another woman's children to me. They're Emma, Eliza, William, and James. I know their favorites and fears, their strengths and struggles. I've grown to love them, Kieran, and I've grown to love you too, though I tried not to. The admission, so plainly stated, broke something open inside him. Without conscious thought, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. Stay, he whispered against her hair. Not just until the snow melts, stay permanently. Tabitha pulled back enough to look into his face. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Kieran nodded, suddenly certain. Marry me, Tabitha, be my wife, be a mother to my children. Help me build something better than mere survival. Instead of answering immediately, Tabitha reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that worry and grief had etched around his eyes. I need you to be sure, she said. Not just grateful for the help with James or thinking practically about the children's needs. I need to know that you, Kieran McAllister, want me as your wife. The intensity in her eyes demanded complete honesty. I can't promise that what I feel now is what I felt for Catherine, he said carefully. That came slowly over years. But I can promise that there's something growing in my heart for you that feels like it could become something just as strong, just as true. Different but no less real. Her smile was radiant. That's the most honest proposal I've ever received. Is that a yes? It's a yes, she confirmed, and then she was in his arms again, her lips finding his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. A small gasp from the doorway broke them apart. Emma stood there in her nightgown, eyes wide. Are you going to be our new ma? She asked Tabitha directly. Kieran and Tabitha exchanged glances, both flushing slightly at being caught. If that would be all right with you, Tabitha answered carefully. Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. I think Mama would say it's a good idea. She always said you were the smartest person she knew. Did she now? Tabitha's voice was thick with emotion, and she said you made the best apple pie in the territory. Tabitha laughed, the tension broken. Well, that's high praise indeed. Perhaps I should make one today to celebrate. Celebrate what? William asked, appearing behind his sister, James's favorite toy clutched in his hand. He'd clearly been checking on his brother. Miss Morgan has agreed to marry Pa, Emma announced before either adult could speak. William's eyes widened, darting between Kieran and Tabitha. Really? Kieran nodded, suddenly uncertain of his oldest son's reaction. William had been closest to Catherine, had mourned her most deeply. To his surprise, William's face broke into a rare, full smile. Good, he said simply. We need her. The straightforward acceptance brought a lump to Kieran's throat. Yes, son, we do. By mid-morning, all 4 children had been informed of the impending change in their family. Eliza was thrilled at the prospect of having Tabitha's sewing expertise permanently available. James, still weak but improving, smiled sleepily when told the news. Does this mean you'll never leave? He asked Tabitha, his small hand holding hers. "That's right," she assured him. "I'll be here every morning when you wake up and every night when you go to sleep." The satisfaction on the boy's face spoke volumes. Over the next 3 days, as James recovered and the snow slowly melted, Kieran and Tabitha began to plan their future. The mercantile partnership was discussed at length. "Mrs. Billings' offer is generous," Kieran acknowledged. "And it would provide steady income. But it would keep me in town 6 days a week," Tabitha pointed out. "Away from the children, away from you." "What if we considered another option?" Kieran suggested. "The Johnsons' place, just a mile closer to town, is going up for sale. It's smaller than ours, but the land is better, closer to the school too." "You'd consider moving?" Kieran nodded. "This place was Catherine's dream, not mine. I've stayed because it was our home, but perhaps a fresh start would be good for all of us." The idea took root and grew. By the time the roads were passable enough for Tabitha to return to town, they had formed the outline of a plan. They would marry before Christmas, combine their resources to purchase the Johnson property, and build a new life together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Whispering Pines. Most reactions were positive. The townspeople had worried about the McAllister children and were relieved to see them being cared for properly. A few disapproving glances came their way for the relatively short mourning period, but even those softened when people saw the transformation in the children. Mrs. Billings, rather than being disappointed by Tabitha's rejection of the partnership, was delighted by the news. "I always thought you and Kieran would make a fine match," she told Tabitha. "Even back before Catherine caught his eye, some things just take time to find their proper course." The wedding was set for December 20th, giving them time to celebrate as a family before Christmas. Tabitha moved her belongings gradually to the McAllister cabin, transforming it with small touches: curtains at the windows, braided rugs on the floors, sachets of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. For Kieran, watching his home come alive again was both painful and healing. Sometimes he would catch himself looking for Catherine in a corner of the room, only to find Tabitha there instead, different, but no less welcome. One evening, 2 weeks before the wedding, he found Tabitha sitting on the porch despite the cold, staring at the stars. "Everything all right?" he asked, settling beside her. "Just thinking," she replied, leaning against him when he put his arm around her, "about how life takes unexpected turns." Having second thoughts, she shook her head firmly. "Not at all, just acknowledging the strange path that brought us here. When I came back to Whispering Pines, I never imagined this outcome." "Nor did I," Kieran admitted. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my days just trying to keep the children alive and fed. The idea of happiness seemed selfish somehow." Tabitha turned to face him. "It's not selfish to seek happiness, Kieran. It's human, and it's what gives us strength to care for others." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You've given us all so much more than help with chores and sewing, Tabitha. You've given us hope again." She smiled against his shoulder. "You've given me a family, a place to belong. That's no small gift." The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the winter sun casting long blue shadows across the snow. The ceremony was held in the small church in Whispering Pines, attended by nearly the entire town. Tabitha wore a dress of deep blue wool, trimmed with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Emma and Eliza, in their new Sunday best dresses, served as her attendants, beaming with pride as they walked ahead of her down the aisle. Kieran, waiting at the altar with William and James beside him, felt a complex wave of emotions as Tabitha approached grief for what was lost, gratitude for what had been found, and beneath it all, a steadily growing love for the woman who had brought light back into their lives. When Reverend Collins asked who gave this woman in marriage, Tabitha's answer surprised everyone. "I give myself," she said clearly, "with the blessing of my dear friend Catherine McAllister, who watches over us all." The mention of Catherine's name caused a ripple of whispers, but Kieran understood the gesture for what it was: not a reminder of his first wife, but an acknowledgement of the connection that had brought them together. The vows were simple and heartfelt. When Kieran promised to cherish and protect Tabitha for all his days, his voice was strong and certain. When Tabitha pledged to stand beside him through whatever trials might come, tears shone in her eyes but did not fall. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Collins declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The kiss they shared was brief but tender, mindful of the watching congregation and the 4 children who now officially became Tabitha's responsibility as well as Kieran's. The celebration afterward at the town hall was joyous. Mrs. Billings had organized a potluck dinner, and nearly every family in Whispering Pines contributed a dish. There was music from Mr. Gardner's fiddle and Mr. Wilson's banjo, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Kieran, who had never been much for dancing, found himself willingly led onto the floor by his new wife. "You look happy," Tabitha observed as they moved together to the music. "I am," he realized with some surprise. "Truly happy for the first time in a long while." Later, as they prepared to leave the celebration, Sheriff Dawson approached them hat in hand. "McAllister," he nodded to Kieran, then turned to Tabitha. "Mrs. McAllister wanted to offer my congratulations." "Thank you, Sheriff," Tabitha replied warmly. The older man shifted uncomfortably. "Also wanted to say I'm glad things worked out this way. Those children deserve a proper family." He glanced at Kieran. "No offense meant by my visit some months back." Kieran, feeling generous in his happiness, extended his hand. "None taken, Sheriff. You were looking out for the children's welfare, as was I." As they drove home through the starlit night, the children huddled under blankets in the back of the wagon. Tabitha leaned against Kieran's shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That tomorrow begins our real journey," he replied. "And that I'm grateful not to be traveling it alone anymore." The Johnson property became theirs in January. The move was completed just before a major blizzard swept through the territory, as if nature itself was sanctioning their fresh start by wiping away the tracks between old life and new. The house was smaller but sturdier than their previous cabin, with the luxury of a separate bedroom for the parents and divided sleeping areas for the boys and girls. The barn was in good repair, and the land, when spring finally arrived, proved more fertile than their previous acreage. Tabitha took to farm life with the same practical efficiency she brought to everything. She learned to milk the cows, helped with the planting, and established a thriving kitchen garden that supplemented their meals throughout the summer. The children flourished under the stability of 2 parents. William, now 10, began accompanying Kieran more regularly on hunting trips and showing interest in the management of the farm. The twins developed distinct personalities as they approached their 6th birthday, Emma more interested in books and learning, Eliza drawn to cooking and household arts. James, fully recovered from his illness, grew strong and lively, his laughter filling the house. Kieran watched the transformation of his family with wonder and occasional guilt. On the anniversaries of Catherine's death and their wedding day, he would grow quiet, sometimes riding alone to visit her grave with flowers from Tabitha's garden. Tabitha never questioned these moments of remembrance. Instead, she created space for Catherine's memory within their new family life, keeping a small portrait of her on the mantel, encouraging the children to share stories about their mother, ensuring that Catherine remained a beloved presence rather than a painful absence. By their first wedding anniversary, the McAllisters had established themselves as one of the more prosperous small farms in the area. Kieran's skill with horses had led to a side business in training stock for neighboring ranches, while Tabitha's herb garden supplied both their own medicinal needs and provided extra income through sales to the apothecary in town. That Christmas Eve, after the children had finally settled into sleep, vibrating with excitement for the morning's gifts, Kieran and Tabitha sat before the fire, enjoying a rare moment of quiet togetherness. "I have something for you," Tabitha said, retrieving a small package from her sewing basket. "I wanted to give it to you privately." Kieran unwrapped the paper to find a leather-bound journal. Opening it, he discovered Tabitha's neat handwriting filling the first few pages. "What's this?" he asked, puzzled. "I've started recording our family's story," she explained. "How we came together, the children's milestones, our daily life. I thought, someday the children might want to know these things, and their children after them." Touched beyond words, Kieran traced the careful script with his finger. "Our family's story," he repeated. "I like the sound of that. I have something else to tell you, Tabitha said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. Something that will add another chapter to that story. Kieran looked up, catching the meaningful look in her eyes. Tabitha, are you? She nodded, her smile radiant. In about 6 months, if Dr. Wallace's calculations are correct. Joy surged through him as he gathered her into his arms. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Our baby. Are you pleased? She asked, drawing back to study his face. More than pleased, he assured her, though I wonder what the children will think. Tabitha laughed softly. Emma has been dropping hints about wanting another sister for months now. I think she suspects already. They told the children on Christmas morning after the presents had been opened and exclaimed over. The news was met with a chorus of excited questions and speculations. Will it be a boy or a girl? Eliza wanted to know. Can I help take care of it? Emma asked eagerly. Where will it sleep? Was William's practical concern. Only James was momentarily quiet, his small face serious. Will you still love us the same? He finally asked, voicing the fear that Kieran hadn't considered might be lurking. Tabitha knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. James McAllister, listen to me carefully. Love isn't like a pie that gets smaller when it's divided. It's more like a garden that grows bigger the more it's tended. This baby won't take any love away from you or your brothers and sisters. It will just give us all more love to share. The explanation seemed to satisfy him, and soon he was as excited as the others, suggesting names and offering his favorite toy for the baby to play with. As winter gave way to spring and spring blossomed into summer, Tabitha's condition became more visible. Kieran found himself watching her with a mixture of joy and anxiety, remembering Catherine's difficult last pregnancy. Stop looking at me like I'm made of glass. Tabitha scolded him one evening as she continued kneading bread despite his suggestion that she rest. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I know, he acknowledged, but I can't help worrying. Her expression softened. I understand why, but I'm strong and healthy, and Dr. Wallace says everything is progressing normally. Despite her reassurances, Kieran insisted on hiring young Jenny Miller from town to help with the heavier household tasks as Tabitha's time grew nearer. The extra expense was worth the peace of mind it brought him. In late June, just as the first hay cutting was being completed, Tabitha went into labor. Unlike Catherine's last birth, which had been prolonged and difficult, Tabitha's labor progressed steadily and without complications. By midnight, with Dr. Wallace in attendance and Mrs. Billings assisting, Catherine Grace McAllister made her entrance into the world a robust baby girl with a powerful set of lungs and a tuft of dark hair like her father's. When Kieran was finally allowed into the bedroom, he found Tabitha propped up against pillows, tired but radiant, their daughter nestled against her breast. She's perfect, Tabitha said as he approached the bed cautiously. Kieran gazed down at the tiny face, overwhelmed by a love so instant and complete that it took his breath away. She is, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion, just like her mother. The children, who had been waiting anxiously in the front room under Jenny's supervision, were allowed in briefly to meet their new sister. Their awed expressions as they crowded around the bed to peek at the baby were something Kieran knew he would remember for the rest of his life. She's so small, William marveled, but she'll grow, Emma assured him knowingly. All babies do. Can I hold her? Eliza asked hopefully. Tomorrow, Tabitha promised, when I've had some rest and you've had some sleep. As the children filed out, each giving Tabitha a careful hug and the baby a gentle touch, Kieran felt a completeness he had never expected to experience again after Catherine's death. Later, when Dr. Wallace and Mrs. Billings had departed and the house was quiet, Kieran sat beside the bed, watching Tabitha and Catherine sleep. The peaceful rise and fall of their breathing, the perfect trust of their slumber, struck him as the most precious sight he had ever beheld. Thank you, he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was addressing Tabitha or God or perhaps Catherine's spirit. Thank you for this second chance at happiness. In the years that followed, the McAllister family continued to grow and thrive. Catherine was joined 2 years later by a brother, Michael, completing their family of 8. The farm prospered. allowing them to add more land and improve the house with modern conveniences as they became available. The older children grew up strong and independent, each finding their own path. William, with his serious nature and steady hands, apprenticed to Dr. Wallace and eventually became the town's second physician. Emma, who had inherited Tabitha's love of learning, became the schoolteacher in Whispering Pines after attending a teacher's college in Denver. Eliza married the son of a neighboring rancher and established her own household just 3 miles away. James, always the most adventurous, joined the cavalry for a time before returning to help Kieran run the farm. Through all the changes, the constants remained Kieran and Tabitha's partnership, their love for each other and their children, and the home they had built together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tabitha opened the leather journal she had given Kieran so many years before. "I was reading some of the early entries," she said, her voice soft with remembrance. "Do you recall what you said to me the night James was so ill? When I first suggested you didn't have to do everything alone," Kieran smiled, the memory still clear after all this time. "I believe I said something about not being free to offer what you deserved. And I said I wasn't asking what you could offer, but how you felt," Tabitha completed the exchange. "It seems so long ago now, in some ways," Kieran agreed, taking her hand. The years had been kind to Tabitha. Silver threaded her chestnut hair now, and fine lines crinkled at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, but to him, she was more beautiful than ever. "In others, it feels like yesterday. Do you ever regret it?" she asked, a question she had never posed before. "Taking a chance on me, on us?" Kieran considered the question seriously, as was his way. "Not for a single moment," he answered truthfully. "You gave me back my life, Tabitha. You helped me raise 4 wonderful children and gave me 2 more. You've been my partner, my comfort, my joy." Tabitha's eyes shone with tears in the fading light. "And you've been mine." From inside the house came the sound of laughter as Catherine, now 19 and as capable as her mother had ever been, teased her brother about something. Michael's good-natured protest drifted through the open window, followed by more laughter. "Listen to them," Tabitha said, smiling. "We did well, didn't we?" Kieran nodded, his heart full. "We did, together." As twilight deepened around them, he drew his wife closer, grateful beyond words for the day she had walked into his struggling household and spoken the words that had changed everything. "You don't have to do it alone," and he never had again.